Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Fabio Spinella, welcome to the show. Appreciate having you on, man.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, Fabio, tell us a bit about My Own Defender and how you are helping your students.
So the concept of My Own Defender was birthed out of my own feeling of inadequacy when it came to defending just myself. And then later in life, as I got married, had a couple of children. In my home, there's four women and me, my little kids, and my mother-in-law live with me. So I started to feel more and more responsibility in having some tools, should the need ever come, where I could do something in the most vulnerable part or most vulnerable experience of their life. They're looking for help. I don't want to be without a tool, without any kind of experience in how to defend ourselves or protect ourselves from somebody that's trying to do us harm. So those inadequacies that I felt in myself, I found that other people had as well. And so I dove deep into this stuff, and I've taken hundreds of hours worth of classes in both empty hand and firearms and survival skills and all that stuff. And what I felt would be helpful is if I could take that large amount of information and distill it down to the most useful things that would help people without having to put in the same amount of time.
So you had your kind of own journey that you had to go through in terms of getting this training, but also now you're in a position, you have the confidence so that you want to share this with other people as well. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. So the problem that I found is that most people don't have that time, right? So I dove in because I have other businesses and I had the time to invest into this, and I feel like it's really important to me. Maybe it's part of my personality. And so I dove so deep into it that people started to recognize and ask questions and go, hey, how do you do that? And what do you think about this? And what should I do if this, that, and the other? And the few pieces of information I was giving to people, which is what I felt were most important and what I actually do with my family, they found really useful as well. And my heart of a teacher, I taught for 10 years at high school and college level, and also my heart for people in helping the helpless and defenseless and all that stuff kind of came to a verge. It came to a point where I'm like, I probably should be doing this. It almost like it was inevitable, the teaching part and the protecting people part, they kind of came to a same place. And I feel like people are getting that information from me in a meaningful way, and they're putting it into practice, and it's helping people. And that makes me obviously happy and satisfied with that.
Absolutely. Well, I want to go back a little bit because you mentioned having this feeling of not having the skills or
Sure.
inadequacy. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe that's
it.
As far as being able to protect your family. Did that come from someplace in particular? Was there like a particular moment in time where you're like, you got that self-awareness, something you saw on TV or just a life experience? Where did that come from?
So we're in a world of YouTube, dash cams, body cams from cops and whatever, and you run across, feeds on Facebook or whatever, where you see these encounters and reactions of people at these encounters. And most of the time, if they're just a regular Joe, like most of us, everyday people are, you find that they spend it feels like an enormous amount of time in that understanding what's going on. It's like a shock. They don't process the information. They're just like, this is not happening to me. There's no way this is going on. And watching that happen, and the thought in my mind was, I don't ever want to be in that space. If I have my children with me and something is happening, I want to get away from understanding what's happening. I want to get to a place where I can decide that there's a threat and decide what I can do about the threat that puts me into the action. So I teach about the OODA cycle, the understand, decide, act. I talk about that a lot in my training. And I say, okay, you need to cut down the time from when you understand there's a threat to deciding what you're going to do about it and actually putting it into action. So going back to the inadequacies, I was watching some of this stuff and it became really obvious to me that I didn't have the tools to deal with those things, much like those people in the videos. And so I started to dive deep into freehand and self-defense stuff and firearm stuff. And what can I do to shorten that reaction time? Because look, you're always going to be behind, when you're responding to something. Action is going to be slower than reaction. I mean, the bad guy is going to have one up you most of the time because you don't see it coming. You didn't initiate the contact. But how quickly can you get to a level playing field and have a chance to survive the encounter or, avoid the encounter or whatever? So those inadequacies drove me to find out how to not be, in that space like you've seen on the videos for everybody else. And because I dove so deep into that, I found that I can probably give some tools to people that are not so overwhelming that they can use pretty much right away and shorten that UDA cycle, right? Understand, decide, act. Get to the act portion quickly, but with good, solid skills, right? Not just act reckless. Are you efficient in your action? Like, do you know how to strike? Do you know how to fire a firearm? How do you do that and all that stuff, which I'm sure we'll talk more of. But that getting around to the action part and not just sitting there going, oh my goodness, this is not happening to me. Meanwhile, the attack is probably over in 2 or 3 minutes. And if you survived it, you're lucky, or you might be injured or something happened that's kind of permanent to you, So that's where it birthed. That's where it was like, I can't be that person that looks at my kid and the kid's looking helpless with those eyes of like, help me do something. And I don't know what to do. I cannot be that person. That can't happen to me. That's where it started. And then I felt like a lot of my friends and family would probably be in the same boat. And I'm like, this is not okay. People need some tools. And they maybe don't have as much time as me to dive in, but I can give them some stuff that's really applicable and significant.
Now, these feelings and this reflection on your skills or lack thereof, did that come before you were married, before you had kids, like you had it already in you, or was it such that it's like, oh wow, I wake up, now I have children, now I have a family, I feel a responsibility to them now, or had you always had it at some level?
Most people, I think, would say that they don't think about it so much until they have a family, and then this growth of responsibility, and that's probably true. I feel like it almost multiplied when I got married, and then multiplied again when I had kids. And I'm like, they're 2 little girls, they're under the age of 4. What do I do? I can't be helpless. But some of that probably is in everybody throughout life. People ignore it most of the time because they don't want to have to deal with the training of it or the time invested in it or the money invested in it or whatever. Or they'll mask the whole thing with, well, I live in a really good neighborhood. That's not going to happen to me, or my kids go to a really good school and like nobody's going to bully them. They're not going to need, any kind of self-defense help or whatever. It's like you can mask things or just know that things happen and you can get some tools in your toolbox to try to avoid things, build your awareness, react faster than most regular Joes. And that'll discourage any attacker. I mean, your reaction time being quick and effective could absolutely discourage something that could, from getting worse.
What do you feel are some of the myths or misconceptions when it comes to somebody protecting their family, protecting their home? What are the mistakes or just the things that people get wrong about it?
Yeah, so probably the most obvious one is people using their firearm as this imaginary safety blanket. I've got a firearm, so I'm safe. And it's like,
so all I have to do to protect my family is to get a gun. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
That's the mistake.
that is the worst thing that I hear people talk about. Oh no, if anybody ever comes into my home, they'll have one come in because I have a firearm. And it's like, my questions are: do you shoot regularly? Are you even proficient at defensive accuracy? Do you know what defensive accuracy is? We define it as whatever stops the threat, in the shortest amount of time. That's defensive accuracy. But some of these people that maybe only shoot once a year will have a horrible time at putting shots on target if the need comes, because they don't have any experience. They don't have any drills that they've done. They've not done any kind of malfunction clearance, all sorts of things that can happen when you're using your firearm. So that's not a safety, that's a tool, right? You have a firearm that's a tool that's going to help you maybe survive a scenario or stay away from a scenario getting worse if you know how to use it. So it's not your security blanket. Your security blanket is you've done the training that helps you be level with the attacker right away, getting through that UDA cycle immediately, and then going, okay, my actions are going to be more effective than the thug down the street. If somebody was to have a gunfight with me, which Lord willing, that will never happen, I know that because of my training, I'm going to be much more effective in my actions if it's going to, if we're going to go back and forth, right? Empty hand stuff. I'm going to be probably a little bit more up to par than the regular Joe down the street that's trying to intimidate me or whatever, right? So, the myth is if I have this tool, then I'm safe. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. If you have that tool and you don't know how to use it, you can hurt yourself. You can hurt people in your family. You can make a scenario worse. You can escalate a situation that wasn't even going to go there, but you presented your firearm in a scenario where you shouldn't have altogether. So you used force that you shouldn't have. Now you're potentially going to get into legal trouble because you didn't even know that you couldn't just brandish your firearm for no reason. You know what I mean? So there's a lot more to owning a firearm, and it's not as easy as if I have it, then I'm safe. You can have it and you can practice with it and do it properly, and that will help you, stay safer. But the tool doesn't do it for you. It's you, right? It's you.
Where do you think that comes from, that people would think that, and that, all I have to do is get the gun. It's simple. That's it.
Probably the way it's portrayed in movies, TV shows, every hero or character in a movie, just, you can see the quick draw from nowhere, the one-handed shooting, and it's like super accurate at 50 yards. It's like, that's not even a thing. Like, you don't do that with a firearm, with a pistol. But I think it comes from that. Like, if I'm a good guy and I have a firearm, like the guys in the movies and the TV shows, then I'm going to be okay. No, half the times you get completely ambushed, and so you may not even be able to present your firearm. If you are able to present your firearm, can you put shots on target while you're completely afraid for your life and the life of your family? You might be shaking. Your eyesight is going to get weird. Your hearing is going to get weird. There's a lot of things that happen when you put yourself in a scenario that way. That's why in a lot of our trainings that I run, we don't shoot at flat targets on a two-dimensional range, right? I have people moving around. We oftentimes try to have more three-dimensional things where you're moving forward and backwards and shooting to the side, and rubber dummies, steel targets, things that are very different and always changing, so that you're making those decisions, right? You're going through the understanding what's going on, you're deciding what to do, you're taking action, and that's happening over and over again. Whereas even the people that think they shoot enough, they'll go to a flat range and shoot at 15 yards and try to have a grouping this big, which is cute, but that's not what you need for defensive accuracy, right? Defensive accuracy is how fast can I stop that threat from hurting me, and that may be a grouping this big, which is probably and by this big I mean 6 inches, 8 inches, since we're doing a podcast here, right? It might be a bigger grouping, but it's much more quick, right? You get to a target faster, and those hits are going to stop the threat sooner. So it's a very different concept, and I think people miss the point a lot.
What you mentioned what people train at, and you talk about flat targets and such. It sounds like there's a lot more to the training that you're talking about than just being accurate with how you fire, right? Yeah. You made mention earlier about gun malfunctions and that type of thing. Those are kind of like, I guess you learn that, and it's a matter of like learning how to you refer to it as a tool, right? Just like driving a car, you need to know how to put gas in, and the oil and all that kind of stuff. Same type of thing with a firearm. But it sounds like, though, aside from that, and aside from practicing your marksmanship, there are other things that have to be considered as well.
Sure. So like when I put my students through classes, I'll often get their heart rate up, and I'll have them running back and forth for a little bit, and then I'll have them stop, draw, and fire on a target. That just little exercises like that expose how difficult it can be when you are a little bit out of control. And in an encounter, you're going to be a lot out of control, especially if you really are feeling a risk for your life. You're like, oh my goodness, that isn't a flat target that's not looking to kill me. That is a moving target that's threatening my life and the life of my family. You're not going to have that calm response where you're just going to sit there and take a really nice aim and line up your shot and press your trigger smoothly. I mean, you're probably going to be slamming that trigger like you're not supposed to, and your shots might be all over the place. And do you really want to put shots where they don't belong and all the consequences that come from that? I mean, if you're in a public scenario and there's other people and you're hitting the wrong people, or you're going through walls, and there's just so much more to think about. There's a healthy fear that you should have from firing your firearm that I think if I do a good job in my classes, people walk away with. A healthy fear of, was it warranted for me to even take my firearm out? And then I had to press that shot. Did I have no other choice than to use that force? And so if people are thinking about that in a training environment, they're going to be in a much better place. Will they be perfect? Will I be perfect if it ever happens? No, I don't think anybody's ever going to be able to say before it happens, because in the moment, when everything is taken over, you might have a bunch of adrenaline coming up, and you're feeling out of control. You're feeling fear. You're feeling all this stuff. So will you be perfect? No, but I think with consistent and continuous training, you can get to a place where your reaction is so much better than anybody else, and you just might have a chance to survive the encounter and to protect your family, rather than, I don't know, my dad once gave me a gun. It's been in the closet for 4 years and it's in a safe, and I have to put in like an 8-digit thing to get it out. Like, you don't have that time. If you own a firearm and you're actually trying to use it for personal defense, you need to consider different places to put it in the house, a much quicker safes. And there's a whole thing that we talk about with students. It's like, if you have it in the big safe in the garage and you're sleeping in the middle of the night across the house, that's not self-defense. That's just a tool it's like the saw that's sitting in the garage. That's cool, but you can't use it. That's not something you use. So these exposing yourself to all the potential scenarios just gives you a chance, gives you a chance to come up to level with the attacker quicker. So instead of taking 30 seconds, 2 minutes or whatever to kind of be aware of, oh my goodness, this is happening, I have to do something about it. What is my next action? I want that to be 5 seconds, right? This is happening. Boom. This is my automatic response to, I have an attacker and it's meaning to do me harm, and this is how I can stop the threat, right? If I can reduce that time for my students, I know that I have for myself. If my reaction time is quicker, then I have a chance. And that's really all we're asking for. We're not training people to kill people. That's not what it is. It's training to give yourself a chance to survive and make sure that your family doesn't suffer harm because nobody was ready for it. You know what I mean?
How do you temper the need for being prepared without getting into paranoia?
Sure. Yeah, and it's a fine line. I mean, I know plenty of gun people that are, living an exhaustive life. I mean, they're just so exhausted from like always being super aware and not having any like time in that relaxed zone. They're always like code orange, like they're about to go to red anytime now. You want to live your life more in the yellow or white sometimes so that you can just decompress a little bit. And those are levels that, I teach about, the white where you're like, you're sitting at home and you don't feel like any fear and you're just hanging out with your kids. You can actually decompress a little bit. I don't love to live there because, you just want to be aware enough. That's yellow. It's kind of where you want to be. Just aware of things that could happen, weird things that stick out, whether you're in public and something looks a little bit funny. You're just aware that that's there, right? You want to live in that yellow state, right? But I know people that get nuts about this stuff and are always living in that orange space. And it's like anybody is a threat. You're a threat. He's a threat. They're a threat. The 75-year-old lady in the front row at church is a threat. It's like, what are you talking about, man? Like, context, So people that get nuts about that stuff, it's a different kind of person. So they get paranoid about everything. What I encourage students to do is to have a little bit of preparedness and just a little bit of awareness. Situational awareness will often be able to buy you time, and time will buy you options, right? If you're aware that something doesn't look right, okay, now I am 15 yards from that person that doesn't look right. For whatever reason, you get that gut feeling that person doesn't look right. I have an opportunity to walk across the street. I have an opportunity to go the other way. That may avoid the encounter altogether, and will never know. And I'm okay with that. You know what I mean? I want to live in that space of preparedness, not in that place of, oh, that guy's a bad dude and I have a gun on me, so I'm going to approach this person. I'm going to make it right. That is not what we teach. That is not what you do. And that is not where you want to live, right? So just being prepared to go, okay, I think that's funny. That sticks out of my norm. So I'm going to just go the other way. And I'm going to make that my level of where I live. I want to live on this space. And so that's how I differentiate the preparedness to the paranoid state. You know, I think people really will just wear themselves out and wear their friends out and their family out because they go so deep in that paranoia stuff. And I have to carry 2 guns on me all the time. One is in my holster, one of them is in my ankle, and it's like, okay, I mean, you're not a high profile target. Probably nobody knows you exist. That's probably the norm. So don't be paranoid, but do have some tools to be prepared. If something were to happen, put yourself in this like mental scenario. If X was to happen, what would you do? If X was to happen in your home, outside of your home, with your kids, without your kids, with the elderly parent or whatever, if you couldn't run away from X, Y, Z or avoid X, Y, Z, what would you do? If you're at that place where you're like, I have no idea, then you need to get some training. That's essentially the goal of my own defender, is to get those people that have 0 tools. I have no idea what I would do. I'd scratch them, or people get crazy about using their keys, in a parking lot and stuff, whatever. But so if you're like that person that doesn't have any tools, go get some tools. Go to a dojo, get some freehand stuff. Go find a firearms instructor that can give you some tools for your home defense. Because, we're in California, not everybody's going to be able to carry their firearm on them. And that's okay. In your home, could you defend your home if somebody were to come in your home? I mean, if anybody's got the little Ring app, I've got Ring products around my home. I mean, you get those reports all day. Like, you get the little alerts. Oh, this happened down the street and that happened down the street, and somebody broke into this house and somebody took something from that car. You don't need to live paranoid. Like, oftentimes I'll even tell my parents, just turn that stuff off. You don't need it. Just have some tools in your home that you feel you can use effectively, and that's good enough, right? So paranoid versus prepared.
Interesting that you brought this up a little bit earlier as well, as far as one of the other ways that you help your students is not just, and we've up to this point we've talked primarily about firearms and having tools such as that.
Mm-hmm.
You made mention even now as far as empty-handed type skills as well. So I think a lot of times when people think about protecting their families and defending their home, that immediately they just go to firearm.
Sure.
Right? But that's not the whole picture, at least from your point of view, it sounds like. Sure. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, one of the other things, when we were talking about myths earlier, one of the other myths is like, okay, or even just wrong information that some teachers are teaching. They'll say, if you hear a noise across the house, and you have to go clear your home. And it's like, no, you don't have to go clear your home. I mean, unless you think there's somebody between you and your kids. Okay, now you have to go across that to get your kids, get them to the safe space, and then execute your home defense plan. Okay, that's I could get that. But if you can get your family into a safe place, you do not need to clear your home. You can call the cops. You can barricade yourself. There's a whole level of that people need to understand. What happens when you clear a room? I mean, this is like, you're at the most disadvantage possible. The attacker is more likely to be waiting for you for an ambush, right? Then you have the time to get through that cycle that we talk about, assess, understand and decide and act. So you walk into a room and there is somebody there now. You have to make a decision. Okay, so you have to understand, is this person dangerous? Is this person my family? And I heard a noise in the middle of the night and I have my gun and I'm drawing on them. You can't just go in there and shoot. What if it's your kids? I mean, you know what I mean? So clearing a home, it's just like such a difficult thing. You're putting yourself in an ambush. And so when we're talking about having some empty hand skills. You want to use the lowest possible level. So if somebody's in your home, but they don't have a firearm, they don't have any tools, they're not even making any motion to want to hurt you, you don't have a right to shoot them dead. That's called murder in most states, especially in California. But so people that don't have that information are finding themselves overconfident in this firearm thing, like the safety blanket, right? You might be able to just say, you're not welcome, you need to leave, I've called the cops, and retreat and go to your whatever barricade, whatever. You can have your firearm there. And if they cross that, like, imaginary, line in the sand, that's a different story. But who knows, that level of force you use, you're not welcome here, you need to leave, I called the cops, maybe the highest level of force you need to do for that to end. So if you stopped your threat at that, great. The next level might be, maybe there is physical contact, but you can't just take your gun out. You may not be able to, maybe it's on you, but you're too close to your attacker, and taking your firearm out at that point may give them the tool, right? So you need to have some freehand skills. You might end up on the ground. What happens on the ground? Can you really be as nimble with your firearm as you would be standing up? Have you ever practiced shooting from the ground? That kind of thing. And so I think it's imperative to have some freehand skills. Most attackers, on the street or whatever, probably won't use a firearm on you, but they may want to intimidate you with their presence and, maybe a tool that they have in their hand, a stick or whatever. And you may not carry a firearms 24 hours a day. So if you don't carry, and most of the times people won't, I've never had anybody point a firearm at me. I likely won't, statistically say I won't. But can I have somebody try to intimidate me, steal something from me, do something harmful to my kids or my family? That is more likely. And so what tools do I have in my toolbox with my free hands that would keep us safe or discourage an attacker? And so I spend quite a bit of time going after those things. If not, I probably spend more time going after that than the firearms themselves, especially here in California where CCW is so difficult. You've got to have some empty hand skills, and in your home, have some firearm skills as well. So have the option of both. One isn't better than the other, and they don't come in order. Oftentimes I'll tell students, okay, what is the lowest amount of force that will stop the threat? And I can give you a list, and the list may start with, okay, you say stop, you say, you try to attract attention to yourself so the more people will come and help you or whatever. Like, you can have all these steps, but they don't go in order. I mean, you might have to jump straight down to, I have to brandish my firearm and I have to point in because this guy is telling me that he's going to kill me and he's got a knife in his hand and he's like 10 feet from me, right? Whatever. Or you might just say stop or whatever with a forceful voice that completely discourages an attacker and they run away. That is the lowest common, the lowest force. And so it's important to understand that though there's different levels, you might skip around and find one that's, more necessary than the other. But at the end of the day, I tell these to my students that between the time that the attack happens and the time help arrives, whatever that time is, and it could be, police averages in the United States is like a little bit over 10 minutes for a police response. Actually, we live in Los Angeles, and in Los Angeles, we have one of the better times, around 6 minutes. But what happens between minute 0 and minute 6? That's when you have to be your own defender, right? That's what I want to encourage people to do. Can you survive the 6 minutes before help arrives? Can you survive the 10 minutes, the 12 minutes, whatever that is? And hopefully there's people around and it's only 30 seconds, but there's a lot that can happen in 30 seconds. Statistic would say that most gunfights end under 2 or 3 minutes. Police won't be there for that. What do you do in that time? Somebody's trying to steal something from you or try to hurt you or whatever. Police won't get there in time. You have to have some tools to be your own defender to survive to the time the police comes, or to survive until the help comes. And that's what I try to share with people. What do you do between this is happening right now and the time you can get help?
I think that's one of the things too that people think about when it comes to learning skills, getting tools for themselves. Is that, oh well, the police are going to come to help me. I just have to call 911 or whatever it might be. But I mean, just the numbers you're giving right there as far as response times and that type of thing, it doesn't sound like those are things that are typically considered when they think about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and some of those times get skewed because they'll classify your call at the call center based on, if there's violence involved, if there isn't violence involved, whatever, robbery versus something else. And so if there's a more violent call, you're going to get pushed down. So if you're going, I think there's somebody in my home. If that's what you say, I mean, your call isn't going to be up there if somebody's calling about an unfortunate event like a rape or, some kind of like stabbing or shooting. If there's that happening elsewhere, that's going to get the first response. I think there's somebody in my home. Now, all of a sudden is not quite as important because the other people are actually, encountering somebody right now. Right. So this is not, again, to put fear into anybody, because that's not the goal. It's just to give you an idea of what can I do in those 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 12 minutes that can help me, stay alive, survive the attack, have some tools to protect my family so that nothing happens to us, or very little, as opposed to we're completely clueless. We have no idea how to defend ourselves. We are vulnerable to 100%, and everybody's just kind of, hoping that somebody will come help us. I don't want to have to rely on the hope that the police will come. I will call the police, and that's part of the home defense plan. Absolutely. We have a home defense plan that we practice, and the whole family knows, even the little kids. If this happens and mommy tells you to go this room, you go to that room and you stay there and you wait, whatever, all the stuff that people should be practicing. But between that, the starting of the plan and the time the help arrives, we have to have some tools in the toolbox that give us a chance to be on a level playing field as the attacker.
I absolutely want to get into what you just mentioned there as far as the home defense plan and, getting your family involved, et cetera. But before we do that, you mentioned also legal, just like the word legal.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that you are not an attorney. You don't,
Absolutely.
not getting any legal advice as such, but you bring that up. Why is that important when you're thinking about defending your family or defending yourself?
Yeah. I mean, so I think the statistic is something like for every round that leaves your firearm, there's about $50,000 worth of investigation that goes on. That seems to be the number that people are going by. So let's say you're firing 6 rounds. Now you have to account for 6 rounds. Why did they go out? Where did they go? What did they hit? What was your intent? I mean, there's like a bunch of layers of stuff. So now you're like $300,000 deep in because you fired 6 rounds and maybe you didn't need to fire any. Now you're in a lot of hurt, or, maybe best case scenario, you hit the target 4 times and 2 went off and did something else. So those 4 stopped the threat. Maybe that gets justified by 12 people in a court of law. Maybe it doesn't. And now you can be held for some other legal thing. But what about those 2 rounds? I mean, they went through the wall and they hit the neighbor's house or whatever, like something else happened. So for every single one of those things, you have to be aware that there's a consequence. And that's why that healthy fear of, do I need to use my firearm right now? Is that something that is the least amount of force necessary to stop this threat, is what I encourage my students to consider all the time. And so that's part of the legal stuff that people don't often consider when they use firearms, especially here in California, where you're not going to get the sheriff from Texas that gives you a pat in the back for taking the bad dude off the street. Over here, it might be a little bit more unforgiving, if that's a word. It's like, no, man, the guy was running out of your house because they heard you coming and you shot him in the back. That's murder. You're going to go to jail. I mean, more times than not. I mean, you better have the best representation on the planet. So when to fire, how to fire, how much to fire. If the threat stopped and you continue to fire, now you have to justify all those extra rounds. They can find out that you shot after the target was down, especially in this age of iPhones and security cameras and all that stuff. Well, the target was down and not a threat anymore after shot 3, but you shot 6 more times. How do you justify that, right? There's a lot of legal stuff to consider as well, and that's not to scare people from, I don't ever want to touch a firearm, because again, that's not the goal. But just, you have to have the training so that you have the information to make a really good decision. Again, it goes back to the understand, decide, act, right? do I really understand the situation I'm in, and how quickly can I process that? Like, how quickly can I assess this scenario, right? Then I have to make a decision. Is the decision appropriate to this level of threat, or am I going from this guy wants to, ask me a question, and I don't think he looks cool, so I'm going to shoot him. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, that's crazy, right? So is it an appropriate decision based on, and then is my action effective, or do I need to empty 4 magazines of rounds to get the threat down? That's a real problem. If I need to shoot 40 rounds to get the threat down, I am not efficient with my firearm, and I probably put a whole lot of people in danger when I did that, right? And then in the court of law, that's not going to go well. Again, I'm not a lawyer, and I can't say what's going to happen to you, but you have to at least have thought about these things in your training and been exposed to scenarios where you just don't have the right to brandish a firearm altogether. So
that's part of the reality that we live in, though, that
right.
typically is not considered in those things that we talked about earlier, like in movies and in media, et cetera. Right? It's like, that they don't put that in the script, but it's part of our reality ultimately, and it has to be considered.
Absolutely.
I want to go back though to that. When we're thinking about defending your family, having a plan, but involving your family. In your case, it's your wife and mother-in-law and your 2 kids.
Yeah.
How do you go about doing that in a way that gets them on board without, again, kind of not getting them, especially with children, scared and
Sure.
like, oh my gosh, right?
Will they be scared? Likely. I mean, if you're going to wake up a kid in the middle of the night and you do it incorrectly with a bunch of fear in your eyes, they're probably just going to start making a lot of noise, crying, whatever.
But I mean, even in terms of just like, okay, you've created a plan, right? Now you're going to talk to them about the process, just introducing the idea to them.
Yeah. Yeah. So the way we do it here, I mean, and every family is different, every plan is different. And, that's part of the process with my own defender. The layout of your home is going to drastically affect your home defense plan, how many people live there, the age of the people that live there, the mobility of the people that live there, their proficiency with firearms, their proficiency with any kind of tool or whatever. So for us, because there's so little, we have a plan where, my wife is going to attend to picking, grabbing them from their room and putting them in our safe place. We have a safe place. Also, making sure that the mother-in-law that also the other adult in the home understands what the plan is, so that she's not in the middle of the wrong, she's not in the hallway when she's not supposed to be. She's going to go to the right place at the right time, and not get to an emotional state where the kids are going to freak out. Right. So there's things that we have in place where we go, okay, this is what you do if mommy comes into your room. You're just going to follow her. You're going to go to this place. You're going to stay as quiet as you possibly can. Right. For them at this age, that's probably more than I can ask of them, right? When they're like 14 years old and we've gone to several firearms trainings, they're going to be much more acutely aware what's going on, and it's going to be a very dangerous home to come into, because they're going to have the tools and they're going to understand when and how and all that stuff. So at this point, that's as simple as we keep it. When mommy comes to get you, you're just going to follow her. You're going to go to this place. You're going to stay as quietly as possible. For the other adult in the home, don't try to clear the house. Don't try to do these things. Just go to the safe place. This is what we're going to do. This is the order. You are in charge of grabbing the phone and calling the cops. You are trying to keep the kids quiet in the safe place. I am going to barricade, blah, blah, blah. So everybody has a responsibility, and those responsibilities change as age changes, as proficiency changes in different things and whatnot. So that's what I work with clients to figure out what they can do in their home to have a plan that makes sense. And it always, for us, it always involves some sort of safe place, some sort of barricade. How do you do that? When do you do that? When do you call the cops? What do you say to the cops? Calling the cops and say, I have my gun on, I'm going to shoot whoever comes to that door, is probably not what you want to say. Something like, I believe somebody's in my home. They're making, I hear them talking. I have barricaded myself. This is what we look like. This is how many of us there are. I have barricaded myself. I am prepared to defend myself if I absolutely must. Please get here as soon as you can. That is a much better phone call than using profanity and, because people, they get the firearm in their hand. All of a sudden they're like Superman. That's what I discourage my students from becoming. Or in martial arts, they have a black belt and all of a sudden like they want to fight everybody on the street. It's like, no, dude, like, you know what I mean? You have even more responsibility by having a firearm. You have even more responsibility having that black belt, right? Like, you have to be super responsible with those tools. And so, instead of getting on the phone and saying, I'm going to effing kill this person and, you can't blah, blah, blah into my home, whatever. That's not what you say. This is what I'm doing. This is what, please get here as soon as you can. I'm in fear for my life and the life of my family. Now you've put yourself in a place where if something were to happen, you've done the right things. You have barricaded yourself. You try to avoid the circumstances. You've told the person closer. You've told the person not to come through that door. You've done other things to avoid the ultimate, because you can't take back a bullet. I mean, once it's out, it's out. It's not coming back. Whether it hits the target or not, it's going to hit something. So I tell my students, absolutely no firing unless you are in fear of your life and you have to do it. And there's no other, force that you can use to stop the threat. And so we talk about those things all the time because it's so important. You can get in so much legal trouble. And if your family doesn't understand that that's what you're supposed to do, they might even go, how come you're not firing? Like, I need you to, right? In that moment, there shouldn't be any talking, right? We're trying to be quiet. We're trying to be like away from everybody, just attracting no attention or escalating the things, with the attacker. If there's an attacker in the house, I don't want them to know where we are. I don't want them to know how much firing power we have. I don't even want them to know that we have anything that we're going to fire with. Some people train to tell them that you have a gun and you're going to shoot them. Why? So what if they get all amped up about having a shooting match? Now they want to come and have a shooting match. I don't want to shoot him. I want them to leave. If they want to grab what they want to grab, I want them to go. So everybody in your family kind of needs to know what the plan is and how we approach things. And when it's time to fire, whoever's been trained to fire will have the tools and will shoot when it's appropriate, right? I don't want, I wouldn't want my wife to tell me, oh, you should fire now. How come you're not firing? or my mother-in-law or whatever, So we talk about these things so that they have a sense of, okay, that person's trained in this, in our home would be me or my wife. Those people are trained. They know what they're looking for. I'm just going to do my part. And my part may be holding the kids. My part may be calling the cops. My part may be barricading the room, whatever, right? But it's imperative. I mean, and I know people that talk about having a plan, but don't really put one together. Or if they're better than most, they'll have a plan, but they will have never practiced it. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I understand that you have a plan, but if it actually happened, what does it look like? Who walks where? And do you cross each other? And at what point do the cops get called? And are you going to be downrange of my firearm? If this is what I'm trying to hold, if I'm trying to hold the hallway in my specific layout, are you going to try to be crossing the hallway? I don't want to muzzle you, right? So we talk about those sorts of things with all the clients and go, okay, well, your layout looks like this. You have 2 floors. Looks like that. Or you live on a ranch and cops aren't going to get there for 45 minutes because that's the nearest sheriff department. Your scenario is completely different, And I talk to those clients too. And it's like, well, yeah, you have a different responsibility because nobody's coming and the attacker knows it.
That's an interesting thing. I mean, there's a lot of, obviously it looks, a lot of things to consider when you're thinking about protecting your family. I mean, it's not as simple as what we see absolutely in the movies or, in fiction, right?
Absolutely.
Or like what we'd hope that it would be just clean and simple or such. Lots of gray area in there.
Mm-hmm.
What have you found? And we've talked about like the importance of it, but what is it that you found keeps people away from getting this type of training or even considering creating a plan or getting the tools or learning about the tools to protect their families?
A lot of times I feel like people will think that maybe it's too much time or it's too much money or whatever. To me, what's the cost of your loved ones' lives, or what's the cost of you being in a wheelchair for the rest of your life? I mean, right? You can put costs on whatever you want, whether it's time, resources, or financial resources. For my students, we mentioned it earlier, I try to keep it so that a busy person, an everyday person, can access the really important tools in a shorter amount of time, so they're not using a whole lot of time. So I will do the hundreds of hours with the classes and go, okay, of the 60 tools that I have for this specific scenario, here's the 5 that seem to be the most consistent across the board. Here's the 5 that seem to be the easiest to use and will get you results. These are really effective, right? You may not know all the minute little nuances of this stuff, but here's the 5 things that you can do if this happens, right? Same thing with firing a firearm. I mean, ammo can get expensive and going to a range can get expensive. My students get I call it a healthy dose of dry fire practice, where you don't have to expend rounds to practice. So there'll be drills and skills that they can work on at home. And I encourage them to do 10 or 15 minutes of that every 2 or 3 days a week is plenty to see massive progress by the time they get to the range again. And once a month range time, if you're a gun owner, that really shouldn't be too much to ask. Now, if you're going to the range means you take 1,000 rounds and you just dump magazines, you're just like pushing your trigger the whole time. Probably a huge waste of time and money, right? So have a reason for every round that goes down range. What is it that you're trying to get better, and are you getting better? Like, do you have an outcome before you go and all that stuff? So when they practice the dry firing skills that I give them, they find that they have much more success the next time when they go shoot live fire. And there's a whole topic about dry fire and how much you do it and how often. I feel like any more than 15 minutes at a time there's diminishing returns. So I tell them, hey, do these 3-4 exercises. It'll take you 10 or 15 minutes. Do 2 or 3 times a week. It costs you no money. You just need to find 10 or 15 minutes of your time. So that decreases the cost investment, in the firearm stuff. And the time thing, again, if you can do it 15 or 20 minutes, 2 or 3 times a week, and then at the end of the month, you maybe go for 1 hour to range. And if you can find an instructor that will give you feedback, that's also super helpful, because then that every round that's going down range is going to have more purpose, more reason, right? And because your instructor is going to say, okay, do these few things to adjust and whatever. Now let's do this on the move. Now let's do these, drills that you wouldn't even think about yourself. And also, if you go to a regular range, they're not going to allow you to draw from a holster. They're not going to allow you to move around, reload, and all that stuff. Whereas if you go with an instructor, you'll go to a range. I take my students to a range it's an open range. We can move, we can shoot. We have our own private range. We can put some stressors, emotional stressors on and all that stuff. So it makes you be more in the scenario, kind of like we do at the dojo for empty hand stuff. It's like, all right, close your eyes. You don't know where the attack is going to come from. And you don't even know what the attack is going to be. So your reaction time is going to be what it is, right? You might be getting attacked with a knife, or maybe it's just a shove, or maybe it's a gun. And what are you going to do? And how are you going to stop the threat, right? So we do kind of the same thing with firearms. Obviously, in a very safe environment, we don't go, hey, shoot wherever you want, right? This is downrange. This is the only place you can shoot, like all the rules. But putting people into scenarios really makes a huge difference, I think.
Can you share maybe an example of working with a student where you've been able to kind of help them to make this transition from like nothing to now they're a bit more confident in helping to defend their family?
Yeah, I mean, so I've had the pleasure of working with students that are maybe younger and super mobile, and they can do all this fun stuff, and they can participate in a tactical class and roll around the dirt and all the fun stuff. But honestly, that's not really what my own defender is about. We're not here to train tactical geniuses or commandos, right? I mean, there's just places for that, and that's cool. Like, go do that. I mean, I do that for fun, but that doesn't really help me with my defense, my like home defense stuff. I'm not going to roll around the dirt and, shoot from a prone position ever. I mean, right. But for the more meaningful students, like I had a student that was probably 74, 75, something like that. This was about a month or 2 ago. And she had a lot of physical disabilities. She had arthritis, or her knuckles, whatever. Like her fingers were a little bit crooked, and she had a hip replacement. So she had limited mobility and all this stuff. And she came with very low confidence in saying, "I have a gun. We have a gun for home defense. My husband is also pretty disabled, so we're not really mobile. We can't really escape or avoid a lot of things. What can we do if somebody comes in our house? Where should we go? And when is it okay to present my firearm, and can you help me be more on target?" Because, she hadn't shot forever. So in a classroom environment, we talked about, okay, what's your house look like? And, let's devise a plan for that. And they were super thrilled with, okay, now we have these 5 things that we're supposed to do when and if something happens, instead of, I don't know, what do you do first? Do you do anything? Do you just, or are you like everybody else in shock for 2 minutes and then another 2 minutes going, this is not happening to me. And by then it's over. Right. So we had the plan, and then we went to the range and we worked with her abilities. Okay, this is how you can hold your firearm. Because, there's very specific ways in which you hold the firearm to manage recoil and get, follow-up shots and all that stuff. But she had some limited things that she could do. And within 30 minutes, she was putting groups together that would stop any threat. She was, and we went out as far as 15 yards. And most times you're going to use a handgun, it's going to be probably inside 5 to 10 yards, really, more like 5 to 10 feet. But she was out to 15 yards putting groups together. They would have stopped just about anything anywhere, right? So even down a long hallway in your home or whatever. So she was thrilled with the ability that she was able to put together this plan in a day or two, because she had to go home and do some follow-up homework on, okay, what can I use to barricade, right? I gave her homework to do stuff. But so I think in a couple of days, she probably finished that plan. And then their shooting skills improved so drastically in about 30 minutes, right? She's not just going to the range for shooting for fun. She had a very specific purpose. She wanted to have defensive shooting abilities. And so we worked on defensive shooting skills, which are not the same thing as marksmanship skills, which is what most people want to work on, right? They want a group that's the size of a dime. And it's like, cool, man, but you don't really need that. And you won't be able to do that in a defensive scenario when you're like shaking because you're so afraid of what's going on at the time. So she was a really good success story. I feel like it's probably one of the people that I've helped the most, because she was so discouraged from her state and her ability to do some things. And then by the end of one session, even, and we're going to have follow-up sessions, but even at the end of one session, she was like, oh my goodness, like I can do this. I can draw this firearm. I can put it on target. I have some great follow-up shots. I can see where the rounds are hitting. That's a lot of confidence. You want to make sure that you get to that level. And I think that was the best story as far as a student. I've had young guys that are already pretty good shots, and we just tweak some things, and they start doing like competitive shootings, and that's cool too. But as far as like home defense, self-defense type stuff, I think she's my favorite.
That's a great one, particularly being in the state that she was in physically, and being in part of what most would say are. She's part of a kind of a more vulnerable type population as well, right? Given her age and challenges there. It's fantastic. As far as anybody that is considering now, they've listened to all of this. They're like, wow, I think I want to take some steps, to help defend my family a bit more. What is the most important question, would you say, that, as a parent, maybe as somebody that has kind of maybe the head of the household or such, what's the most important thing that they really need to consider starting down this path?
Yeah. So I would put myself in like a hypothetical scenario. And again, it's not about paranoia or inducing fear or whatever. Just go, if this happened, what would my response be? How long would it take? Would I be in shock? And honestly, if you're really honest with yourself, even me with as much training as I have, I think if something, the moment this happens, I'm going to have to shake myself out of it, and my training is going to take over. But there's going to be that moment of, oh crap, this is actually happening, right? So put yourself in a hypothetical scenario and build that awareness, right? Be aware of what you don't know. What would you do if X happened? What would you do if X happened with your kids next to you? Because most of the time an adult would say, well, I would try to leave the thing right away and try to run or whatever, which is great. And you should. If you can, you should. But if you have your 75-year-old grandma that can't run, what are you going to do? Right? And so if you find yourself in that scenario, like, well, I really need to get some skills. I need to go, okay, maybe my freehand stuff needs to come into play. Maybe my firearm stuff needs to come into play. Again, what if your kids were there and you have 2 kids and you can't carry both and you can't run? Just putting yourself in those hypothetical scenarios will give you an insight as to how much you don't really know. I know that was definitely the case for me, and it's the case for just about everybody that I work with. They go, I was thinking about it, or I saw this video on Facebook, and I saw this lady, she was waiting for the elevator, and this dude just walked up to her and shoved her, and it's like, what would I do? Do I just lay there helpless, or do I go get a couple of tools that give me a chance against a really bad dude? And so I think most people that want to think about that and put themselves in the shoes and have no answer would go find somebody that they can work with. And I tell all of my students, you go find yourself a dojo that does some self-defense classes. That's huge. I mean, I do a few things in my classes, and then I go, okay, this is the tip of the iceberg. Now go study with somebody that can give you 3 days a week, And then on the firearm front, find yourself an instructor that understands self-defense accuracy, right? Because you'll go to an instructor that wants to teach you marksmanship and all that. And you'll have the most beautiful groupings if you stand really still with this beautiful posture and your front sight is lined up with your back sight and you got equal height and equal sight and all the stuff that they tell you, and you take the breath and you hold the breath. Look, let me tell you something. If somebody's staring at you, telling you that they're going to kill you and they have a gun pointing at you, you are not going to hold your breath. You're going to slap that trigger as fast as you can to make the thing stop. I mean, it's just the truth. Now, if you've practiced that, in control as much as you can, okay, you're going to put 6 rounds on target under this many seconds, you're going to have a much better chance of putting those rounds on target than the person that's always shot like I shot every 20 seconds with the most perfect posture, right? So find an instructor that understands self-defense accuracy, and he's not just working on your competitive shooting, and he's not just working on your like super nice gun with all the like tricked out like sights on it and all that stuff. What are you actually going to use for self-defense? And take that to the range with an instructor that understands self-defense and work on self-defense skills, because those are different than marksmanship skills. I work with my students on both. It's nice to have marksmanship, but marksmanship under like extreme pressure, it doesn't look the same, right? Groups are going to look really rough. And so practice some self-defense stuff. Inside 5 yards, what does your target look like? Do you really even need to look at the sights inside 5 yards? That's one of the things that I ask my students all the time. Most people, if you have good presentation, you don't even look at the sights. You're completely threat focused, and your shots are going to go where they need to go if you practiced it that way too.
That's fantastic. Fabio Spinella, this was great. For anybody that has found themselves here listening to this and they want to get more from you, where could they do that? What's the best place for them to do that?
Right now, Instagram and Facebook, the handle is @MyOwnDefender. I have some content up. I have some drills that I've videoed, so you can go practice them yourself. On the Instagram, you can also get the free home defense tips. You can just click on the link. It'll take you to a page where we can send you what to do and what not to do in a home defense kind of scenario. And the website with myowndefender.com.
Fabio, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate having me.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.